The bronze rim of the shield bit into his forearm as the line surged forward. Not a charge, not a retreat, but controlled, grinding shove, the kind that crushed ribs and snapped spear shafts without ever breaking formation. Dust hung in the air like smoke, turning the narrow pass into a tunnel of blurred shapes and muffled screams. The Persian infantry came on in waves, shouting in a dozen languages, their wicker shields splintering as they collided with a wall of overlapping bronze. The impact rolled through the Spartan line like a physical force, shield to shield, shoulder to shoulder, every man absorbing the shock for the one beside him. Spears punched out from between the shields and synchronized thrusts, short, brutal motions designed not for flourish, but for killing in inches of space. A Persian fell, then another, trampled underfoot as the mass of bodies pressed forward again. No one broke ranks. No one stepped back. There was no room to run, even if they wanted to. The Phalanx was a machine now, breathing and moving as one organism. Its front rank bleeding, its second rank pushing, its third rank bracing, all of them locked into a silent contract. Hold a line or die in place. Somewhere down the formation, a man screamed as a spearhead punched through his groin, but his shield stayed up, still covering the man to his left as he collapsed. Another hoplite stepped forward into his place without a word, sealing the gap before it could become a wound in the formation itself. This was Thermopylae, 480 BC, not a battlefield, a pressure chamber. To understand why this line did not break, even when everything in the human body demanded retreat, you have to go back centuries, to the moment Greek warfare stopped being about heroes and started being about discipline. By the 7th century BCE, warfare across the Greek world had changed its shape. The age of aristocratic champions clashing in loose formations, each man seeking personal glory, had given way to something colder, heavier, and far more unforgiving. The hoplite emerged not as a knight or a warrior poet, but as a citizen soldier drawn from farmers, craftsmen, and landowners, men who could afford their own armor and were now expected to use it in service of the city-state. The equipment alone dictated a new kind of fighting. A hoplite carried the aspes, a large round shield nearly a meter across, constructed of layer faced with bronze, weighing as much as 8 kilograms. He wore a bronze helmet that narrowed his vision and muffled his hearing, a cuirass or linen corselet, greaves to protect his shins, and he fought primarily with a spear roughly 2.5 meters long. This was not gear designed for agility or individual maneuver. It was designed to survive impact and to kill in formation. Out of this reality came the Phalanx, a tight, rectangular formation of heavy infantry, ranks deep, shields overlapping, spears projecting forward in a bristling hedge of iron. In theory, it was simple. In practice, it was a psychological crucible. Each man's shield covered not just himself, but the man to his left. Step out of alignment, and you didn't just expose your own body. You created a gap in the wall, a hole that enemy spears could exploit, a weakness that could ripple outward into panic, collapse, and slaughter. This was the brutal arithmetic of the Phalanx. Your survival depended less on your own courage than on the discipline of the men beside you. Most Greek city-states adopted this formation out of necessity. Sparta turned it into an obsession. Sparta did not invent the Phalanx, but it re-engineered the human beings who fought inside it. Spartan society was built around a single institutional goal, producing soldiers who would not break under pressure. From the age of 7, boys were removed from their families and placed into the agōgē, a state-run system of upbringing that combined physical training, deprivation, punishment, and relentless psychological conditioning. They were deliberately underfed to encourage theft, then beaten when caught, not for stealing, but for failing to steal well. They were forced to endure cold, hunger, and exhaustion. They were trained to move in unison, to respond instantly to shouted commands, to hold formation under simulated stress. Pain was normalized. Fear was suppressed. Individual identity was systematically subordinated to collective function. This was not cruelty for its own sake. It was preparation for the exact moment a man would feel his instincts scream at him to run, while his officers screamed at him to hold. Spartan training emphasized formation discipline above all else. Not marksmanship, not personal combat prowess. The reflex to stay aligned, to keep your shield in position, to maintain spacing even when bodies were piling up at your feet. They drilled in step in rhythm, in coordinated advance and withdrawal. They learned to fight not as individuals, but as components of a moving wall. In this system, the shield was more than a piece of equipment. It was a moral object. A Spartan was taught that losing his shield was a disgrace not because it meant personal cowardice, but because it meant he had abandoned the man beside him. The famous injunction given to Spartan mothers, with it or on it, was not about death over retreat. It was about never breaking the formation. By the time these men reached adulthood, their nervous systems had been rewired. The instinct to flee under threat had been replaced with a reflex to close ranks. All of this mattered when the Persians came. When Xerxes' army crossed into Greece, it brought with it numbers that dwarfed anything the Greek city-states could field. Ancient sources exaggerate wildly, but even conservative estimates place the Persian force in the tens of thousands, possibly more. Against them stood a coalition of Greek forces, including a corps of 300 Spartan hoplites under King Leonidas, supported by several thousand allies. Thermopylae was chosen not for glory, but for geometry. The pass was narrow, compressed between mountains and sea. In places, it was little more than a road wide enough for a few men to stand abreast. This neutralized the Persian numerical advantage and prevented large-scale flanking. It turned the battlefield into a funnel, forcing the enemy to attack in narrow columns directly into the teeth of the Greek Phalanx. This was exactly the environment the formation was designed for. The story did not end in that narrow pass. It traveled outward, carried by survivors, poets, and strategists who understood what had actually happened at Thermopylae, stripped of its romantic varnish. The lesson was not that a few hundred men could hold back an empire forever. The lesson was that discipline, terrain, and formation could impose disproportionate cost on a numerically superior enemy. It was proof that cohesion itself was a form of weaponry. In the years that followed, Greek warfare did not become more heroic. It became more mechanical. City-states across the Hellenic world refined the phalanx. Armor was standardized. Drill became more formalized. Tactical doctrine increasingly emphasized depth of formation, synchronized advance, and control rotation of ranks to manage fatigue. Commanders learned to read the psychological state of their formations, not just their physical position. They learned that morale failure preceded physical collapse, and that maintaining alignment under pressure mattered more than aggressive pursuit. Sparta's reputation hardened into legend, but its real influence was structural, not mythical. Other states did not copy the agōgē in full, but they adopted its core insight that soldiers had to be conditioned to suppress individual panic responses and replace them with formation reflexes. The phalanx became not just a tactic, but a social contract. Each man's survival depended on his neighbor's discipline. Each man's discipline was a debt he owed to the line. This logic endured for centuries. The Macedonians under Philip II and Alexander the Great modified the phalanx into a deeper, longer-range formation built around the sarissa, a spear nearly 6 meters long. The principle remained the same. Individual brilliance was subordinated to collective function. The killing power of the formation did not come from any one man, but from synchronized geometry and mutual trust under fire. Even Rome, which eventually dismantled the phalanx as a dominant battlefield system, absorbed its psychological logic. The Roman manipular and later cohort formations preserved the idea that discipline and cohesion mattered more than individual heroics. The Roman soldier fought in a formation that punished panic and rewarded endurance, rotating lines to sustain pressure, maintaining spacing and alignment even under missile fire. What Thermopylae revealed was not Spartan exceptionalism. It revealed a fundamental truth about organized violence. When human beings are compressed into formations, trained to act in unison, and conditioned to suppress instinctive fear responses, they become something other than a collection of individuals. They become a system, a machine that processes impact, absorbs casualties, and continues to function as long as cohesion is preserved. The phalanx turned war into an engineering problem. The real heroism of that battlefield was not the last stand. It was the thousands of micro-decisions made by men who stayed in alignment when everything in their bodies demanded escape. Men who held their shields steady while watching friends bleed out at their feet. Men who stepped forward into front rank without ceremony, sealing gaps with their own bodies because they understood what a gap meant. They did not leave memoirs. They did not have statues erected in their honor. Their names were not recorded in victory lists. Their contribution was structural, not symbolic. The ancient world remembered Leonidas. It forgot the men whose discipline made his stand possible. And that is the uncomfortable reality behind the shield wall. Its power did not come from exceptional individuals. It came from the erasure of individuality under pressure, from the willingness to surrender personal survival instincts to collective necessity, from a social system that trained men to measure courage not by how far forward they charged, but by how firmly they stayed in place. In modern culture, courage is framed as motion, action, advance. In the Phalanx, courage was inertia. It was standing still while a human mass collided with your shield. It was keeping your spear level while your arms shook from exhaustion. It was refusing to step back even when the ground beneath you was slick with blood and bodies. That is what Sparta's obsession with cohesion actually produced. Not invincible warriors. Unbreakable lines. The shield wall was not a crowd. It was a moral technology. A system that turned mutual dependence into combat power. A formation that made fear predictable and manageable by distributing it across a collective structure. Thermopylae did not change the outcome of the Persian invasion on its own, but it changed the psychological geometry of Greek resistance. It proved that unity under pressure could impose cost, delay, and strategic friction even against overwhelming force. And it left behind a lesson that outlived bronze armor and wooden shields. War is not won by heroes. It is won by systems that can function when humans reach their breaking point. If this story moved you, remember the men who held the line, not for glory, not for legend, but because discipline demanded it and survival depended on it. They are the reason history turned where it did. As the Persians advanced, they found themselves colliding not with individual warriors, but with a moving barrier of shields and spear points. Their lighter infantry, equipped with wicker shields and shorter spears, were at a reach disadvantage. Every time they surged forward, they met a synchronized thrust that punched through armor and flesh. When a spear broke, another immediately replaced it from the ranks behind. The Greeks rotated their front line in and out to manage fatigue, a practice maneuver that required absolute coordination. Men stepped forward into blood-slick ground without hesitation, taking the place of the wounded or dead, sealing gaps before they could form. From the Persian perspective, it must have looked like fighting a machine that repaired itself in real time. But even in perfect conditions, the Phalanx was fragile. Its power came from cohesion, and cohesion was always under threat. Sweat blurred vision. Helmets narrowed peripheral awareness. Dust clogged throats. Muscles burned under the constant pressure of pushing and bracing. Men watched friends die inches away from them and still had to keep their shields up, their spears level, their feet planted. Every instinct to step back, to create space, to breathe, had to be suppressed. A single man losing nerve could expose 3 others. A single misstep could open a corridor for enemy spears. This was where Spartan conditioning mattered most. When the Persian immortals, elite infantry, were sent in to break the Greek line, they failed. Not because they lacked courage or numbers, but because they were trying to push through a formation that did not yield, commanded by men who had been trained their entire lives not to flinch. The Spartans did not shout. They did not rush. They absorbed impact, pushed back in unison, and advanced inches at a time. Their discipline turned the narrow pass into a killing zone. The real threat was not Persian steel. It was human panic. As casualties mounted, the danger collapse grew. Bodies made footing unstable. Blood turned the ground slick. Exhaustion slowed reaction time. Men were forced to fight on muscle memory alone. And still, the line held. What finally changed the equation was not brute force. It was betrayal. A local Greek named Ephialtes revealed a mountain path that allowed Persian forces to outflank the defenders. When the news reached the Greek commanders, the strategic reality became clear. The pass was compromised. The formation that had held back a massive army was about to be attacked from behind. Retreat orders were issued. Most of the Allied contingents withdrew. The Spartans stayed, not because they were suicidal, not because they were seeking a glorious death, but because their doctrine, their training, and their cultural logic dictated that their role now was delay, to hold long enough to buy time for the rest of Greece to prepare. They compressed their formation. They tightened their shield wall. They advanced into the narrowing space with the same discipline they had shown from the beginning. The final phase of the battle was not heroic. It was mechanical. Spears snapped. Swords and daggers replaced them. Shields were dented and split. Men fought at arm's length, then shoulder to shoulder, then chest to chest. Missile fire rained down from Persian archers' position on higher ground, punching through armor and flesh. The formation shrank as casualties mounted, but it did not dissolve. Even in death, men stayed in place, their bodies braced against shields, still part of the wall. The Phalanx did not break. It was crushed. By the end, the Spartans and their remaining allies were encircled and annihilated. The pass fell. Persia advanced. But the strategic effect lingered. Thermopylae was not a tactical victory. It was a psychological one. It demonstrated that discipline and formation could neutralize overwhelming numbers. It bought time. It shaped Greek resistance. It turned cohesion into a weapon, and it revealed the real logic of the Phalanx. Not individual bravery, not personal skill, mutual dependence. In a world obsessed with heroes, the most powerful innovation in Greek warfare was a decision to turn fear into formation and men into components of a collective machine. This was the shield wall,